Have you been to Tech Yes Waterworld?
I've been there a few times and I came back feeling like a new man.
And welcome to part 2 of Can Yes Fix It, the episode where you guys send in your broken parts and I do my best to try and get them working again. And in yesterday's episode, I'll put the link up here if you haven't seen that already, we did get some motherboards to come back to life. But this time around, we're dealing with an entire range of different products. We've got graphics cards, CPUs with bent pins, and CPUs that came in and are untested, as well as a heap of memory sticks and a motherboard with 2 Xeon X58 sockets with its own unique DDR3 memory sticks that were made only for this board, I believe. So that's something I've never seen before. The first thing we're going to fix is this Ryzen 7 2700X here, which got sent in from a user via Twitter who said they had some problems installing it. It was very finicky and they just got, they didn't want to damage it anymore. And so they offered to donate this part if I could get it working. And bent pins is one of the specialties of mine. So we're gonna quickly get straight into that and see if it works. And now we've got this 2700X. It is working absolutely fine after we bent all those pins back. And I've also decided to test out the DDR4 memory that got sent in from my cousin. And he's also sent along 2 6600Ks. So I'm gonna test them out as well because he pulled them out of a PC and they were essentially just scrapped PC, so he didn't know if they worked or not. But this 16 gigabytes of DDR4, that works as well. So I've now finished testing the 6600Ks out. Both of them work fine, that memory works fine, and what we've got here is 2 motherboards I picked up a while ago for $20 a pop, and that's what I've been saying about deals. I know this is a pretty good deal at 20 Aussie a pop, which is like 15 USD, and now I've got literally the perfect scenario for these motherboards where I've got my cousin Sam, and thank you so much for these donations. We've got these CPUs working, and we've got the memory that works on this side, and then I've added another 16 gigabytes of DDR3 on this one because this board's a DDR3 version, this one's a DDR4 version, but I couldn't ask for a better scenario in this case because it's all worked out where I've got 2 bare bones kits pretty much for 90 Aussie dollars total. But now it's finally time to get onto the graphics cards, and usually what I do with cards like these that are untested, I just clean them down first, because cleaning them down first is just going to save us a step in the process, where if I boot them up and they don't work anyway, then I'm going to clean them anyway. So why I just clean this stuff down first is I just get to the bottom of it and do all I can first, and then if it doesn't work, I know it doesn't work. So cleaning down these 5 GPUs actually took a lot longer than I expected, and that's mainly due to this GTX 580 right here and this GTX 200 series. Both of these just had an insane amount of screws on them, where the 580 actually had these very small inverted hex heads on them, where I had to get a special tool that I rarely use and use that on this because I didn't even have a drill piece small enough to quickly unscrew all the pieces on this 580. I believe NVIDIA have reintroduced this with like the Founders Edition cards on GTX 10 series and RTX cards. But regardless of that, we've got 5 cards now that are all cleaned down and have brand new thermal paste on them. And I've also purposely left the backplate off the R9 390X because I want to test it without the backplate on first, just to see if it gives out a signal. So the first card up and running is the R9 390X, and it is working absolutely fine. The FPS is a little bit low because I'm testing 1440p Ultra 8-speed MSAA, which is really strenuous on the graphics card, but the temperatures are really good. Also the noise on this card, surprisingly, is actually really good. I've never really come into one of these R9 390s from Sapphire before. I think this is a Tri-X, and it's doing an extremely good job. Though one thing I have done is left the backplate off, as I said before, and when I looked at it closely, I could see like there was these spots on the backplate with the plastic where it's been smeared. And so that's not a good sign, because I have had in the past a GPU that has been causing issues due to the backplate. When I took that off, it worked fine after that. So this is probably another case of just the card over time, something's happened, and then it's not enough to cause any permanent damage, but it's enough to basically make it capacitive, so it's interrupting with the signal. That's what I think happened, though I'm not 100% certain. But one thing I do know is that we've got an R9 390X that's working like brand new, and it's had the thermal paste changed, and everything is good to go. So let's continue on with our next line of graphics cards. And here we are with the GPUs all finished in testing, and the 3 on the right here, these are all working absolutely fine. And the GTX 200 series, this has still got 1 GB of video RAM on board, so I wouldn't mind seeing if it could play even just Fortnite at low settings at 720p, because maybe we'd be able to put that in a real budget-orientated rig. The one below that, the GTX 580, that is still a decent card if you have those motherboards that don't support any of the newer AMD or NVIDIA cards, because this has the older firmware on board that still supports those secure boot PCs. And so that's one of the decent reasons to still use a GTX 580 in a real low-end rig and still get some decent performance. And then of course, below that is the main prize of the bunch, the R9 390X. I'm super stoked that this one works. Though over here, both these GTX 460s, they gave out problems, and they gave out actually different problems, to the point where this one here with the rusted ring that we cleaned off, that gave out a B2 error. And that means that it just can't even initialize the GPU's firmware. So it's pretty much just a toast card. The fan wasn't even working either. I'm guessing whoever had this had the fan go out on them, and then that's caused the GPU pretty much just to melt, and that's a goner. And then the one above that was must have happened at the same time, because this one here was actually booting fine. Like, it would boot to Windows, but it would just give out no signal whatsoever. So when this one went, I'm guessing something went on this too, with the display on the back here just giving out no signal now. And I mean, honestly, that's not really that big of a surprise, being that it's from a company called Point of View. I've never heard of them before, and probably never heard of them for good reason, because this thing it looks like garbage, and they both are pretty much just dud cards that are gone. But now it's time to get on to some of the best news, and that is 2 Xeons X58 in this dual socket board with that proprietary memory. And so with the dual Xeon system, I've spent over a good hour trying to get this thing to post a signal, but it just doesn't, both via VGA on the graphics card or via a actual port on the monitor itself. And I've tried changing all these different pins here, looking up the manual online and setting them to enable things like the SMB, trying to enable VGA on the board, which was off when I got this in. And what worries me the most is that even the pin with the speaker, it's got the internal speaker, even that with enabled, is not posting any beeping noises or anything. So we're just essentially getting no signal out of this thing, and I just can't figure out why it's not booting at all. So we had the 2 Xeon X5677s in there initially, but I've taken it back now to a 5500 series processor that was made in 2008 to see if that could help it. Maybe it needed a BIOS update, but it's essentially just not posting at all. There's something wrong with this board, this motherboard inherently, to the point where I think it's not working. But if you guys have had any experience with dual socket X58 boards and there's some kind of trick that I'm missing to get this working, I'd love to read that in the comments. But for what it's worth, since the speaker's not posting any beeping noises, that is pretty worrisome, because usually on a server board, especially a 2-socket board, you usually get a beep to let you know that the board's booted up even. So we're not even getting that. So not sure what's going on here, but we're going to keep on rolling. And here we are with the conclusion of all these parts here, and the majority of them are a success story, where we've got 3 graphics cards that are working absolutely fine. We've got all the CPUs, they're working fine too, and even that i7-860 that we pulled out of that motherboard with those severely bent pins in the previous episode, that's working too. 3 of the RAM sticks, 1 4GB, 1 2GB, and 1 8GB stick, they are posting, but I still would like to run them through a stress test to make sure they're 100%. Though this one memory stick here, unfortunately, didn't make the cut, where it just sent the motherboard into a loop before it could even post. So that one's out of the picture. And then we've got these 2 GTX 460s, which are also out of the picture, quite literally. And behind that, we've got this one, the mystery, the dual Xeon X58 socket board here. That is not posting properly. It's not even giving out a beep. But I figured, since there was a heap of motherboards getting washed, and maybe this board here, it's just a little bit sweaty. So tomorrow morning I'm gonna wake up, because I'm pretty tired, it's pretty late. I'm gonna give this thing a shower and just make sure it's all hygienic, and then we'll give it one more try. Though there is some bad news already, and that's I've looked at behind the board, and there's like some brown tinging on one of the circuit lines. So that's really not some good news, but of course we will go out with a bang in this second episode of Can Yes Fix It. And this is some really good news. Our SuperMicro dual Xeon motherboard is now working, at least with one CPU. And we're now going to try and put back the original 2 Xeons on board, and then see if it boots off this VGA. And if it does that, then we can go to the graphics card and see if it does that after the GPU. Because if it does work with the GPU, then I am going to be super excited, because the Tech Yes Water World has now brought back one very important motherboard back to life.
Hey Dabman, have you been to Tech Yes Water World?
I've been there a few times and I came back feeling like a new man.
So that roller coaster ride has now come to a conclusion, and this board, the CPUs and all the memory is now working 100%. And initially, as we said before, we had to put in an older Xeon, and that worked. And then what I did from there was I tested out the single socket with all those CPUs, so those 5677s, and they both worked individually just fine. I tested out all the memory sticks individually, they all checked out fine. So I then knew it was the motherboard that was just having some issues with getting two CPUs to work. And so we got the VGA card working, and then after that, we got both the CPUs finally started booting up normally. And what we've got out of that now is 8 cores, 16 threads, 16 gigabytes of RAM, and the board also works with the latest and greatest graphics cards. So after that initial VGA test, I then put on a newer graphics card, and that was posting out a signal as well. So really happy with the results here and what we've got out of this, because initially it just looked like there was no hope. Last night before I went to bed, I was like, yeah, that board's a goner. But then we took it to Tech Yes Water World, gave it a nice clean, and I did use detergent this time. Some of you guys were like saying, yo, use detergent. Did give it some detergent and then dried it off, and then it also gave it some data vacuuming as well, just to make sure every speck of water drop was off this board. And so, as we said in the previous episode, if you guys are gonna wash parts, make sure the water is completely off the board 100%. And in the previous video, I did cop a bit of slack for washing motherboards and doing some of the unorthodox stuff that I do around the channel here, but I've been doing this stuff for years. And I remember like over 4 years ago when I started using WD-40 or CRC556 and brake cleaner, I was met with way more skepticism than I've ever been in recent times. So that's why I get the skepticism now. I just flick it off because it's nothing compared to what I copped back then. And fast forward 4 years, I'm still doing the same stuff. I'm still using brake cleaner, still using WD-40, and I got some really good comments in the last video where someone tried out the multi-purpose spray and they were blown away by how good it was. And so I love reading comments like that, because at the end of the day, I don't tell people to go do what I do. I just show them like, look, if you've got nothing to lose, you can try doing this stuff for yourself. And if it works, you've then got something that didn't work working again, and you can recycle that stuff and put it to good use. In terms of some of these methods and how I came up with them, the history of it is just got to do with cars mainly. I used to work on cars, and some of the stuff would be so filthy. Like, you guys haven't seen dirty parts until you've worked on car parts. And so I'd try some of these products, and then my car would work better after that, because I used to mess around with these old JDM style cars. And so it's just trial and error. And what we saw with this SuperMicro board is a classical example of this board. The person who sent it over, it didn't work for them. They were like, look, Tech Yes, give it a crack. And I gave it a crack, and I gave it my all, and now it's working completely fine again. But basically around Tech Yes City, I'm just gonna keep doing me, and I hope you guys are enjoying the content, and also in the process, you're bringing some of those PC parts back to life. So looking back on today's episode, we had one of the biggest success rates that we've had on any Can Yes Fix It episode, where we started off with that 2700X. We ended up bending those pins back. That went really smooth, and we got that working again. And then my cousin sent over two 6600Ks and also 16 gigabytes of DDR4 memory. All that ended up checking out absolutely fine, though I will ask him what PCs he did pull them out of, because I think he said office PCs, but I don't know of like any like office PCs that have 6600Ks in them, though I will ask him. And then after that, we had those 3 of 5 graphics cards that we ended up getting to work, especially that R9 390X. I think that was the most important card to get working, and then it did work. Unfortunately, those GTX 460s from some weird brand we've never heard of before, both of them just didn't make it to the final cut. And then we had the other sticks of memory, the DDR3 sticks. We had 3 of 4 of those worked out fine, where one of the Corsair sticks was bad. That was the 4GB module. And then of course that last up, that SuperMicro board, both the CPUs, the motherboard ended up working, and all the included memory ended up working fine, but we did have a lengthy process to get that working again. Though with that aside, if you guys enjoyed part 2 of Can Yes Fix It, then be sure to hit that like button for us. Also let us know what your favorite fix of today was. And also one thing I'm gonna say before I get on out here as well, I'm not like a micro electrician or anything like that. I don't have any skills when it comes to micro soldering. Sure, I can do your basic soldering wires together, and that's some stuff I do here on the channel, but I've tried micro soldering before and I'm terrible at it. So that's one of those things as well in Australia, like it raises the argument of too, one thing I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments was, even if I did that stuff, how long would it take to usually fix up a motherboard if you are a skilled technician in that field? And even then, say for instance, if we've got like a $60 H61 motherboard, would it just be cheaper to buy another motherboard or fix it? Or how much would it cost in terms of time and parts to usually fix up one of those motherboards that has a busted down logic circuit? I'd love to read someone's opinion in the field who actively does stuff like this, because that's one thing I've sort of shied away from, mainly because I'm terrible when it comes to micro soldering. Like my hands just sort of fidget that little bit, where you need to have what they call surgeon hands, where you've just got so much precision and your hands barely move. Like if you got a 200mm camera lens and zoomed in on some of these dudes, man, they'd just be like, wouldn't even move. If you did the same on my fingers, it would just be shaking. It'd be like an earthquake or something. But anyway, that aside, I also need some opinions on the X58 sockets that we've got here, in that they've got screws coming out. So I can't use 2 Snowman coolers on this SuperMicro board, and I'm pretty sure it's not LGA 2011, which has got a different socket. So if someone has some cooler recommendations for this motherboard, I'm all ears as well. Love reading your thoughts and opinions as always. And speaking of thoughts and opinions, we've also got the question of the day from Cyber84, and they ask, is it wise to put the water pressure on the pins? And this is basically coming from yesterday's video and also today's video. I did watch this motherboard. Pressure with pins is one of those things where I actually haven't got an exact answer. I'd love to hear if someone has actual statistics on the pressure, maybe it's in PSI or something like that, on when the certain amount of pressure gets to a certain level, that pin bends. Because from my experience, I know LGA pins will bend easier than PGA pins. The exact pressure is unknown though, but the water we're using in the videos yesterday and today was just running tap water, in that it wasn't high pressure at all. Don't go putting a pressure washer on pins, or don't go putting really fast running water on the pins. That might actually bend them. Though that being said, I'm not curious to try, because when I do bend those pins back, whether it's PGA or LGA, you kind of gauge the pressure it takes to bend those pins, and then you kind of know with sort of like the street smarts that that won't bend it or that will, if that makes any sense. So basically, slow running water is not going to bend LGA pins or PGA pins, but I'd love to know if anyone has the actual official statistics on those bending limits. I'm all ears. And with that aside, I'll catch you guys in another tech video very soon. If you stayed this far and you're enjoying the content and you're not yet subbed and you want to get those videos as soon as they drop, sub button, ring the bells down there, and I'm going to let Dadman also take out this outro for you guys. Peace out for now. Bye.
Make sure you subscribe to Yes Tech City.